Hello and welcome to the Castle Talk podcast, where we talk to writers and creators of today's genre worlds. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, author of the upcoming series Young Captain Nemo from Vival and Friends, Macmillan Books. Tonight, we're talking to Patrick Hemstreet, the author of the new Harper Voyager book, The God Peak. Patrick is a neuroengineer, entrepreneur, special warfare-trained Navy medic, stand-up comic actor, and the author of The God Wave and now The God Peak. He lives in Houston. So we talk a little bit about the effects of Hurricane Harvey, upcoming Hurricane Irma. He's talking about living with his wife Abby and his sons Gideon, Ezra, and Seth. And of course, his new book is The God Peak, again from Harper Voyager, a new thriller about neuroscientists who create a dangerous race of superhumans. So here's that interview. Welcome, Patrick.
How are you? Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm very excited to talk to you. It's always cool to talk to a fellow Texan. So
You mentioned the hurricane, and we're kind of in ground zero where the flooding occurred. And so I've been spending the past week with, a rebreather mask and work gloves, throwing, rotten stuff to the curb and just helping out anywhere I can, and just kind of trying to get our lives back to normal from the massive devastation.
it strikes me as really strange and even surreal that you can be in the middle of all these duties of dealing with your house, of dealing with your neighbors, carrying things out, and at the same time you have a job, you have a career, you have a book that you have to talk about. Does that seem very strange?
No, I mean, I'm a father of three small boys, so I'm used to juggling. I mean, it's you divide the day up into partitions, and you devote your attention to a partition at a time. So it's definitely a labor of love, particularly the helping folks out part and getting things back going. We want to get back to some normalcy here, and we're all eager to get back to that. So that's really a huge motivator.
All right, this is the second book in a series, although I believe it stands alone as an adventure. Can you explain the Zetas? What makes them different from you and I, and how did they come into being?
Well, they're not different from you and I. They are, when the original, I'll harken back to the first book, the test subjects are chosen based on their professions because, initially the technology that Chuck and Matt are developing, they're developing for business reasons. And so they hire people or bring people on to be test subjects that are most conducive with those ends. And so these are regular people. There's an architect, there's a video game designer, a heavy machine operator, computer programmer, and they bring them on board, and they develop these abilities. Of the idea is, in my mind, it's kind of an ode to neuroplasticity, in that these normal people, when they use their minds in a different way and in a different manner, they develop new neural pathways that open up the door to astounding new abilities. And so initially, they're not anything different than you and I. They're just using their minds in a novel way. So the alphas and the betas are, it's essentially just the first batch, Sarah, Tim, and Mike are the alphas. They were the first group of test subjects. They were the first subjects to exhibit the God wave, the Zeta wave, and actually and use it in a independent manner. The betas came a little later. So essentially, in true scientific manner, they just applied Greek letters to the two groups of test subjects, chronologically. And so you have the alpha group and the beta group.
What strikes me as funny is that's very similar to what Aldous Huxley did in Brave New World, where you had people whose brains had received more, better chemicals, better oxygen, and so forth. And they were known as the alphas, and they were the ones that were expected to do the thinking of society. And the other groups, all the way down, were expected to use their brains less, and so forth.
I didn't have any dystopian ideas when I wrote this. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm a big believer in mind over matter and how the mind has dominion over the body. And so the only distinction between alpha and beta is chronological. The alphas have just been doing it longer than the betas. There's no idea that these are a superior branch or a superior class. They just have more practice. They're just senior athletes compared to junior athletes. They're varsity, and the betas are junior varsity working their way up to varsity. It's really not about inherent static abilities. It's about the development of these mental abilities and this telekinesis over time, and how it can develop and flourish with the right practice and the right application of mental energy.
They essentially want to rebel and become a problem that our main characters have to deal with.
Yes, but like all villains, all true villains, they don't see it that way. They're going to be the cure
Right.
to the world's ails. They see themselves as Sarah's kind of the one that clues in on it. She's the smart one of the group, as they say. And she understands that this is something different, that this is possibly, she understands that she was a regular person before the experiments began. And now she isn't. Now she's something else. So she sees herself as maybe she does see herself as a step in evolution, the next step in evolution, but in any event, what she does see herself as is a harbinger to a new condition of human existence. And she's going to bring that about, hell or high water. And it's going to be peace on earth and goodwill to men, and it's going to happen in the way that she sees fit, and it's going to happen right now. And so it's kind of like, she's the nuclear option of, Pax Zetonicus, that's it. It's going to be people going to beat their swords into plowshares, or face the consequence.
I'm just fascinated by this concept, and I know that in the end, what we're dealing with here is an adventure, but it seems to me there's something really interesting and kind of scary there. Like if you knew that everybody over at MIT was, so thousands of people over the course of several years, were taking some kind of course that was going to transform their brains so that they were going to become a completely different class of individual, even more so than they are right now. It strikes me that would be really scary for our society to suddenly go, well, there's us regular folk, and then there are these like super brains.
It's utterly terrifying. I mean, just think about it, because you don't have a way to vet people for their morality, and it's just a situation where you have people who are essentially have these superior abilities, and their minds work in such a manner that they can manipulate reality. And they may not have your best interest at heart. In fact, they may regard you as something of scorn. They may, something an object of ridicule or scorn. And it's extremely terrifying that anyone would have that much power. And so it's kind of like this. You believe that certain evolutionary advances come in stair steps. The kind of the stair step theory of evolution. If we are destined for more mental, if our brains and minds can do more than what we actually can understand now, and if there is going to be a stair step in evolution, a straight line upward, what will that be if not everyone comes along? If it's only a portion of humanity, I mean, it is very frightening in that sense that we could have a class of people that have this much utter power over the rest of us, and they may not be such nice people. I mean, it's ultimately it's truly terrifying. It's being conquered. I mean, being conquered and essentially maybe not enslaved, but oppressed or ruled over or tyrannized would probably be a better word. It's the ultimate fantasy of horror, I would say.
I remember Arthur C. Clarke actually posited that idea. You're the last standing across a stream, putting a Homo sapien on the other side, and how these two people might regard one another, and what kind of fear and suspicion, wholly appropriate, by the way, would would appear on the part of man's immediate predecessor. You're talking about doing that again. I mean, it's definitely a proper realm for science fiction, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly. But the other thing is that you have to think of the reason, in Arthur C. Clarke's scenario, the evolved human is the next step, and the predecessor probably has an inkling and an understanding that he's an older model, that he's not an upgrade, and evolution doesn't adhere to the adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Evolution keeps going, and it's going to pass you by. And so that feeling of dread, if let's say the alphas and the betas, these zetas actually did come into existence in our time, you and I would be kind of sitting back and saying, we're old news, we're older models, we're obsolete, and that's a truly horrifying horrifying concept.
It is. But it's a wonderful basis for an adventure series. That's. Is this your first book series?
It is. It is. It is. My first Godway was my first novel, and Godspeak is my second.
Oh, congratulations! That's really fabulous. You want to tell me a little bit about the path?
Yes, I mean, it started when I was in the military. I was in a very intense training program, and I started to kind of learn how my mind could direct my body even at points of complete exhaustion. I could will myself to get up and keep going. And so I had an appreciation for the power of the mind and how the mind can drive things that seem physically impossible. And so as I got older and I got into the professional field doing neurodiagnostic and seeing the electrical impulses of nerves in the brain and things like that, I put the two together. I'm also an ardent student of mysticism and I guess what things you'd call a cult or that kind of thing for my entire adult life. And so my professional, my experience in the military, my professional knowledge, and my hobby, my hobby studies, my occult and mythology and things like that collided. And then I thought, the interesting thing about brain activity is the more you pull your awareness out of the physical world, like the closer you get to sleep or the deeper you get to sleep, the slower your brain gets. And so I thought about the opposite. What if you were really, your mind were engaging in mind over matter and it was seizing reality and manipulating reality? What would that look like? Well, in my mind, it would look like the opposite. It would be a giant burst of energy and this unfathomable energy. And so that's how the idea of the God wave or the Zeta wave was born, this huge burst of energy in the brain, in the EEG. And so that's where the idea came from. And, molding mysticism and neuroscience is really what I wanted to do, to bring these two together in kind of what I hope is a harmonious tale or a harmonious confluence of these two elements. So the manuscript was done, and, it was a Word document. And so I immediately started querying agents, just started made a query letter and started sending. Any author or would-be author knows that the querying process. You shotgun a bunch of them out with a query letter and you hope to hear back. Well, I got a bunch of hits early on from agents. And as soon as I'd get a nibble, the next day I'd get a rejection. It would say, oh, this looks great. The next day I would get, sorry, not for me. And this happened like 2 or 3 times. And so I decided, well, I need to find out what's wrong with this thing because there's obviously something wrong with the manuscript that this is happening. So I sent it off to Kirkus and used their indie review service. And they came back with a great review. I got a wonderful Kirkus review. I mean, and then that just opened up doors. I had an agent within a month, and I had a publisher within another month. And it was, that review plus just, going out and emailing people and speaking to people, I was able to get into. And so it went from a Word document to, a novel. And that's it. One industry review, positive industry review at Kirkus kind of opened up those doors.
It's remarkable. Do you? I would assume. It seems to me that the process of creating a manuscript is one that demands, I think, more than anything else, more than talent, more than desire, more than anything else, it demands discipline. And I would think that your background would, that whole thing of like being able to will yourself to keep working when you're tired, that would actually come to bear in writing your first manuscript. Is that the case?
It's more, the idea, it's not so much discipline as it is, because there's a certain flow, there's a creative flow that comes through you. And I believe it's almost like channeling that or directing that energy. And so that's really the key, I think, is directing that creative energy, keeping it charged and keeping the flow coming and being able to harness it and direct it and shape it. And that to me is more of an integral part of writing a manuscript than anything else is whatever you want to call it, that creative force that, the mother of stories that kind of flows through all of our minds, directing that element of the human psyche is really, to me, the core element of writing a book or writing any story. I mean, even telling a story.
When you, I'm just curious. This is your first one. I assume you're working on the third one now, unless you've already finished it. Yeah. So if you're working on that, I'm curious about like just your nuts and bolts day to day. process? Like if you go, hey, I got to get some work done on the book today, do you go, I'm going to do it 3 days a week or every day? And do you have a daily goal? What is your process as far as that goes?
I like to ride waves of inspiration, because what you need to do is, in order to produce your best quality work,
Hmm.
you need to act and create under an inspired basis. Otherwise, your work will
Hmm.
appear contrived. And so, what I like to do is,
Interesting.
when I have that inspired basis, I go nuts, and I just, coffee and writing, and then if I have something that I don't think is so great, I maybe will back off, and I'll start to reshape it in my mind and kind of chisel at it and go back and forth and kind of brainstorm until it's something that really gives me, an uplifting, confident feeling, and then I'll just pour it out onto the page. I'll just attack it. And so you really need to follow that inspiration, because if you don't, in my mind, you're not going to produce quality. If you try to contrive something that is not inspired and in the vein of your story, it's not going to be that great. It has to come. And so, but when it's really inspired, when you have that feeling in your mind, it's welling up and you feel it, the kind of the heat on your face and the kind of tingling behind your ears. You can really pound out some stuff that will surprise you when you look on a page like, wow, I'm really proud of that. And you just keep going. No, I'm not saying you should get hung up on sentence structure and words, and I didn't put a comma there. Gosh, I have to go back. No, I'm saying that you should follow the inspiration and don't get hung up
Yeah.
on the details. You edit afterwards. Everyone knows that. You write it and then you edit after it's written, and that's really the process. It's nothing really special. That's kind of what I do.
When you anticipate being done with the third one?
Soon here, I'm hoping before the end of the year, or maybe early next year at the latest.
Patrick, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and I wish you all the best. I especially appreciate you sharing about your process. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it, man. Anytime.